Welcome everyone. My name is Melissa Witt, and I am a program specialist here at the Center for Cooperatives. And we're excited to have you all here today for this Appalachian Cooperatives initiative. I would also like to introduce our speaker today. We have Aaron Dawson with us as well. And Aaron is the Workplace Development Senior Director for the Industrial Commons, where he leads efforts to create and sustain worker engagement programs through open book management and worker committees in manufacturing plants interested in shifting to a more democratic and millennial-friendly culture. He also assists in cooperative development for the Industrial Commons enterprises and employee ownership transition for businesses thinking of selling to their employees. He has 15 years of experience as a worker owner at Equal Exchange, a fair trade Massachusetts company specializing in the sourcing and distribution of coffee, tea, and chocolate. For 10 of those years, Aaron held the role of customer service manager, overseeing a team of 12. He has many years of experience participating in and facilitating worker committees and developing ideas, policies, and practices that create a positive and supportive work environment. In addition, he was elected to serve on Equal Exchange's board of directors for 6 years and was chair of the board for one of those years. Aaron holds a master's in management, cooperatives, and credit unions from St. Mary's University in Halifax, Canada. He served on the board of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops for 4 years and served as the board treasurer for the Democracy at Work Institute for 6 years. Aaron is a certified coach with the great game of business, and we would like to welcome you here today, Aaron, for what you're going to be sharing with us and giving us this amazing presentation, which I am so excited about. And I would like to offer you now to go ahead and get started.
Yes, hi everyone. It's good to see you. If you all could put in the chat kind of who you are and kind of where you're from or what brings you to this webinar, that would be amazing. That'll help me kind of get to know you all a little bit better. And I will share my screen now. Let's see if that works. Hit slideshow. All right. Cool.
Yes, we see you. Great. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So I'm going to be presenting on the Industrial Commons. I hope I will see many of you all in person in Western North Carolina and the foothills of the Appalachia in a few months. I like to start with this slide, and I really like to start with this slide with this quote, right? Rebuilding a diverse working class based on locally rooted wealth, where we focus on ownership and agency. And I think I'm going to kind of come back to that theme in a bit, but I think that is core to what we do. And in a minute, you'll hear why. You heard all about me, so I don't really thank you so much for that lovely introduction. That's me with my pandemic mustache, but otherwise, yeah, I think the one note, right, 15 years working at a worker-owned co-op, Equal Exchange. When I started, it was around 60 worker owners, and we did about $10 million in sales. Again, fair trade coffee, tea, chocolate. When I left 15 years later, we were about 130 worker owners and $70 million in sales. So I got to kind of see what it's like to A, work in a worker co-op, B, kind of work within many different parts of it, being a worker, a manager, and on the board of directors. So kind of all the management, worker, and governance side of things, and be a worker owner as well. And I got to see what it's like for any company, let alone a worker-owned company, kind of grow and scale. So at the Industrial Commons, as was noted, I do a number of things. Internally, I do training, and externally, I do I help companies convert to employee ownership. Okay. So thank you all for putting in your info. Before I kind of begin, I am going to kind of zoom out here for a minute and just ask, do you all have any questions for me that I can make sure I touch on in this presentation about the Industrial Commons, about worker co-ops in general? Because hopefully we'll have some time, but maybe I can lace it into the presentation itself. So any questions for me off the bat?
And you can feel free to put those questions in the chat, or if you'd like to, we're a very small group, so feel free to unmute and share those questions as well. And Erin, I'll start with a question if you don't
Yeah,
mind. And
sure.
I think you're going to talk about this, and hopefully we'll see it more in our visit, our in-person visit. But I am really interested in any insight you can provide, or kind of your perspective on what have been the biggest challenges developing a worker cooperative ecosystem in a rural space. I'm really interested in this idea of we have various examples of worker co-op ecosystems across the United States, but they tend to be in urban spaces. And so I just would love to learn more about industrial commons work from a rural perspective.
Awesome. Yep, we can talk about that.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions?
Feel free to put questions in the chat. Again, you don't have to have questions. And you can also add those questions as we go along.
Yeah.
And Melissa and Erin and I will be keeping an eye on the chat as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to make sure if I can touch on the upfront. But that is good. Let's go. Feel free to add to the chat and let's go move forward. So I think, when I go back to this quote, right, rebuilding a diverse working class based on locally rooted wealth, place is really central to what we're doing and why we're doing it. Trying to find the chat. Great. So we are still a manufacturing region. Normally and typically manufacturing pays better than service sector jobs, but still the median household in our region is 23% lower. Poverty is 20% higher than the national average. We are a relatively white part of the state. However, we do have a fair amount of we have a percentage of Latin American immigrants, largely Guatemalan, as you'll learn, also Hmong immigrants as well, but predominantly white. And despite the fact that unemployment is hovering around 3.5%, I just looked at the stats yesterday. It's 4% currently for Burke County, but it's been between 3 and 4 is actually the highest it's been in, I would say, a few years. So the unemployment rate is still very low. Despite that, you're seeing these kind of lower than household national average on income and stuff. And so there's a great opportunity because we have manufacturing in our region, and there's a way to use manufacturing to lift people up. And I think the most important part of this history, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about our history. We are still largely a textile and furniture manufacturing region of the state and of the country. Long history of both. But what happened in our region first in the 1990s and then in 2008 after the crisis was NAFTA was signed in, and a huge amount of our textile and furniture manufacturing companies went south, went out of our area. And then 2008 was sort of not the final nail in the coffin, but another nail in the coffin where you just saw a huge outflowing. When the going got tough, the manufacturers got going, right? And so Molly Hemstreet and Sarah Chester grew up, born and raised in Morganton, North Carolina. So born, raised, grew up here. In 2008, Molly Hemstreet, the woman on the right, was teaching English as a second language. She had done some rural organizing, actually also helped her husband do some plant organizing of a local, labor organizing of a local chicken factory. And her students were having trouble paying attention. And when she asked why, they said, we don't have stable jobs, we don't have stable pay, we don't have stable hours. And she went to her mentors, including Frank Adams, who was based in Asheville for many years. Frank Adams is kind of like one of the forefathers of the U.S. worker co-op movement, and said, what do I do? I'm tired. Like, there's got to be a better game than just fighting with employers and they eventually leave when it gets too expensive for them to stay. And he said, well, you gotta start a worker-owned textile co-op, right? And so Molly Hemstreet, who went to Duke University for biology, said, yeah, that sounds great. She also had mentors in the traditional textile world. Her high school swimming coach was the head of the NC State Textile R&D Development Center, and he too was saying, "Yeah, you can do it. You can make a good job in textile manufacturing." He said, "Go for cut and sew." So cut and sew is where people send their raw materials to you, and you cut it and you sew it into like a t-shirt, and you slap their label on it, but you basically put it together. He said, the margins are tight, but if you do high quality, you can actually create a return that's enough to pay people a good living job. So she did it. She started with, a few sewing machines and a few friends actually from some of those labor struggles in the chicken plant. And from that, they just started to grow and get more successful and more successful. Around 2000, I think around 2012 is when Sarah Chester entered the scene. She was heading up a program for the local economic development corporation called Work and Burke, which was really trying to get the youth of the region to stay in the region and work in manufacturing. And she would tour all these various manufacturing facilities, and a lot of them were kind of dark and no one would look up and no one would smile. And when she toured Opportunity Threads, everyone was younger. B, they would look up, they'd say, "Hey, how's it going?" They were, like seemed happy to be there. And she said, "Something's different here. What is it?" And upon exploring it, she really, and talking to Molly, she really came to realize that a big part of that difference was the worker-owned co-op side of things. So I'm going to kind of go over kind of the history and the enterprises, and then that we've helped start, and then I'm going to talk about what you'll see after that. So Opportunity Threads, again, was the first. This is them standing in their 30,000 square foot manufacturing facility that they purchased with 90% cash down because it was a profitable business. And they had enough money in the bank to put down an offer. The last 10% was helped through self-help credit union. So an example of co-ops helping co-ops. Their error rates are like 0.3%, so less than 1% error rates. Their retention rates are over 90%. They have over 40 workers and over 20 worker owners. They share the profits with all the workers, whether they're worker owners or not, but they share higher percent of the profits if you are a worker owner. And I'm not saying that, yeah, you become worker owned, then you're going to have higher retention, you're going to have, lower error rates. What I am saying is the qualities that make for a good worker-owned co-op are qualities that make for a good place to work. And the people who work, the people who are thinking about, well, frankly, the governance system itself, those who are responsible for leading the organization are responsible directly to the workers. There's a direct governance tie to the stakeholders. So they're getting, in the 2010, 2012, when Sarah enters the scene, they're getting more and more successful, and they're starting to have to turn away jobs. And so Molly feels like she doesn't want those jobs to go certainly outside the state, certainly outside of the country. She's like, I know there are other textile manufacturers here. We should create a network. So her and Sarah work together to gather all these somewhat competing small to medium-sized textile manufacturers to solve this problem, to share the kind of the work. And they created the Carolina Textile District. All right. And so Carolina Textile District was formed at first to really just make sure that these jobs aren't being lost, that they're staying within the region. But they started realizing other things. They started realizing that a lot of the entrepreneurs that maybe want a custom-made, curtain or pillowcase don't really know how to source and supply things for a national, US-based textile supply chain. So they created classes for entrepreneurs to learn how the textile industry worked. They also realized that some of the plants in our area needed more sewists. It's kind of a dying art, so skilled labor. And so they started offering skilled trainings to folks. So right now, we've got a class of 8 people who are learning how to do industrial sewing in one of our in the corner of our warehouse. And so I guess I'm going to quickly note there's a theme here that's throughout this entire kind of our entire development, which is there's an entrepreneurial thread, certainly to Molly. There's Molly right there. When she sees a need, when we see a need, and then later Sarah, when we see a need, we create an enterprise or either a worker co-op or a nonprofit program to solve that need. And so we're always trying to figure out how we can solve the needs of the people in our community. So CTD, Carolina Textile District, started how did we sell? So I'm going to touch on, I'll get to these questions in a second. Let me get through this, but this is great because I'm actually going to segue to the Appalachian Regional Commission, which started gaining interest in Carolina Textile District and said, how do we fund more of this? Or said, we want to fund more of this. And we said, great, we're open to to grants. And they said, you need it to not be a 501, you need it to not be an LLC, which is what the Carolina Textile District was structured as. You need to start your own nonprofit. So that's where the Industrial Commons was formed, right? There was a need to take Appalachian Regional Commission money to develop, to really take this Carolina Textile District and develop it some more. So we started doing that. And shortly after, we realized, we can continue to work on the Carolina Textile District and make that more successful of a program. But we could also take what we've learned from founding Opportunity Threads and found more worker co-ops in our industry, which is textiles. And at about the same time, this is around 2017, 2018. This is right when I came on board. So we started getting more funding. I came on board originally, we got a grant to help local manufacturers set up what we called worker committees, which is, frontline and middle managers working with senior management to either improve processes or improve work life in the plants. So that was one thing we realized, we can use grant funding to also help other manufacturers in our region lift the floor, right, of the quality of work in our region. And Molly's plant, Opportunity Threads, they were producing a ton of textile waste and were having it recycled. And the local company that was picking up the textile waste and recycling it said, look, there's no money in recycling it anymore. So we can pick up your textile waste. You can pay us to pick up your textile waste and we'll dump it in a landfill, but we're not going to recycle it anymore. And so she said, we can do this work. We know this region. We know the textile manufacturers in our region. We will create a worker-owned co-op to pick up that textile waste. And so that's how Material Return was formed. Was at first just it was picking up textile waste and selling it off to a recycler. Now we learned, much like what the recycling company, the textile waste company who stopped picking up Molly's stuff told us, was there's not a lot of money. It's like pennies on the pound to take textile waste, send it to a recycler, sell it to a recycler where they chop it up and they kind of turn it into a material that maybe goes in the roof of your car, right? It's insulation. It's called downcycling. Again, going to our mentors, the other theme here is, we're not disrupting industries without understanding industries. We have friends and mentors in those industries that are helping advise us the whole time. So Dan St. Louis, again, the head of the Manufacturing Solutions Center, the NC State Innovation Hub, said, you can make more margin if you take that textile waste and turn it back into a raw material. And Appalachian Regional Commission encouraged us to write a grant for $1 million to buy a machine that did just that. So I'll touch on it in a minute, but that's exactly what you're going to learn about when you visit. You're going to get to see that that machine and how it works. So that's Material Return. So they're now not only picking up textile waste, but they're helping manufacture new textiles from it. And at the same time, we started realizing, we need bookkeepers for our enterprises, but our community also needs good bookkeepers. And Our community actually needs people, bookkeepers who don't just speak English. So Good Books was formed. Charlay was the founder of Good Books, which is a bilingual, women-run, women-owned, worker-owned bookkeeping cooperative. And so they help us out. And lastly, kind of on the overview piece, you know, we've been able to do through the nonprofit arm amazing programming. So this is just TOSS, which is our community art program. We merged with a community arts nonprofit in 2021, I think. And so they offer like after school programs that use art and integrate art with our textile waste. So they're taking these colorful strips of fabric and turning it into art. They're doing murals, so we set up murals all around our Morganton. So we'll drive you by some of those murals, so you can see our murals. They're actually going into schools. I think Burke County, I can't remember how many schools they have, but they only have one art teacher for the entire county. And so we're actually the founder of TOSS is doing going into schools once a week and doing an art program there. So that's kind of what we do, what we've done, what we've accomplished, right? We've created 85 quality jobs between our assets. The other thing I'll talk about, the other thing I didn't mention is we are building a $40 million innovation campus to house not like some of these programs, ours and others. So we've got revenue plus assets is what this 64 million represents. We're training workers through our worker committees, through our I do open book management, through skilled trainings, right? We've been able to save 1.9 million pounds from landfill. And Good Books is currently managing around $9.4 million in assets. So, oh, and then, yeah, in just 2023, we've been able to work with 3,685 students and community members. Our theory of change is really this, right? My buddy Bob right here. Here's Bob. He helped found. He's the R&D director and the founder of Material Return. He painted these paintings, so when you come, you'll see them on our wall. But it's give quality jobs, teach workers how to be successful at their jobs, create ownership for those jobs, right? Help organize internally ecosystems and externally ecosystems so that we can be stronger together and then transform our communities through that. And again, I really like this locally rooted wealth because the original question in Molly's mind is how can we make it so the companies don't leave when the going gets tough? Well, if the community members own those companies, they're going to be far more committed to keeping them and making it work, right? So that's why ownership is a centerpiece of our reason for being. And then, you know, the future, right? 10 years, we just got this amazing $15 million National Science Fund grant to make circular textiles, which is, again, you take textile waste and turn it into new products, new textiles. For this region, actually, it's a corridor of Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, to make that region the region in the US where if you want something that's environmentally friendly made with textiles, you go to this region, and it's based off of these things like diversity, equity, workforce development, and employee ownership. So I'm going to talk about what we'll see, but let me answer some of these questions in the chat first. Does that sound good? Awesome. Okay. Okay. So general challenges. I'm going to talk about general challenges, and maybe I'll just go up to this question as well. General challenges in forming a co-op today versus 15 years ago. and then biggest challenges in developing worker cooperative ecosystem in a rural space. I think it's kind of one and the same. Developing, we were really hoping we could go really fast with material return, and frankly, quite honestly, we're still in the R&D phase. We're about to get out of the R&D phase, and we'll talk about some of the part. We're not just a concept. We have an amazing partnership that you'll see where you're here with the smart wool sock company, and I'll explain that in a minute. But you kind of, in a rural environment, you just have less people, right? And so you can either spend 1 year importing people from outside the region, experts, to build up your co-op, or you take 5 years to build up the people that you bring on so that they're ready to run the co-op. And I think we'd hoped that we could kind of move folks faster once we brought them in to not only understand the co-ops, but not only understand the co-ops, but also just understand business, right? And so I think when I talk to groups that are interested in kind of replicating the industrial commons model and doing kind of cooperative development, I really kind of hammer on, like, you've got to have someone who enjoys and understands the business. And so I think fundamentally you need to what's been challenging is just like getting the right people in place that have the values of wanting to help workers and create this kind of worker-owned democratic organization, but have the business sense to make it work, right? I've got to look up who the nun is, but it's a great quote from a sister who said, it's two things. It's no money, no mission, no mission, no money, right? And so the point is, like, no money, no mission gets quoted more because it helps nonprofits push their board into doing focusing on money a little bit, which I think is really important. Like, literally in a worker-owned co-op, if you don't have money, you don't have a business. The no mission, no money is the whole reason that you're there is for the mission, and so you need to keep that mission central, or eventually you will stop making money, right? So let me go back here. Okay, let me keep reviewing these questions. So I just think the general challenge is continued, especially in a rural place, of finding the right people and getting them up to speed and quick enough, and making sure that you have the business expertise to make a go at it. What is the governance setup of Opportunity Threads? Maybe that's a question we can ask them. I do know they have a board of directors. The board of directors oversees the general manager. They recently increased their number of worker owners from like 12 to, I think, 25. And so I don't know if they were all on the board and that's changed. So that's maybe if we can put a pin in that, and I'll try to maybe Hannah can make sure we remember that. Opportunity Threads typically asks like what questions we have before we go, and so that'll be a good one to remember. But essentially you become a worker owner, and the worker owners have a board, and the boards oversee the general manager. So it is worker led, 100% worker led. How do we sell the co-op model to those involved in traditional forms of regional economic development from the local? So one of the other people we're going to talk to is our other founder, Sarah Chester, who really, that question's for her. So I've made sure we booked an hour of her time. I think it's really understanding the environment you're in and the people who are in it. Again, Sarah and Molly were both born and raised in Western North Carolina. We got funded $5 million. We got put for our innovation campus $5 million into the state budget by two very, very Republican, or by a very Republican, very red local representative, state rep. In part because, they were able to see that we're trying to build successful businesses, that we're trying to bring business into the community. And they've known Molly and her family for years, right? And so it's both and, right? How do you compete in the cost of the product? This is what we're all figuring out. On the costing side of things. And sorry, that last question again, that's my kind of amateur answer, but I would say if you want a more nuanced answer, come to Morganton in November and you'll get a much better answer than mine. How do you compete in cost of the product? With Opportunity Threads, it was finding clients that understood what we were doing. Opportunity Threads, and you'll see it, one of their biggest clients is an organization called Project Repat. And so Project Repat, main line of business is you send in your old t-shirts that you want to be turned into a blanket, and it goes to Opportunity Threads, and they cut out the t-shirts and sew it onto the back of a blanket and then send it back to you. And so that's why I talk about your error rate is 0.3%. It's because you're not just making a t-shirt, you're literally deconstructing someone else's memories. So it may have been a son who's going to college or something like that. There is no room for error. And so they are willing to pay more for a higher quality. And they've tried to work, sometimes Opportunity Threads has been kind of, so busy that they weren't able to handle all the work. They've tried to get other cut and sew factories to handle the work. No one else has been able to do it. So they always go with other manufacturers and then have to bring it all back to Opportunity Threads because that quality is so high. So that's one and similarly, right, with our kind of new circular textile, you're really trying to create value add by saying this is environmentally friendly. And I just have to say, like, I don't know how much you all are like going to manufacturing conferences with like furniture or textile manufacturers or reading the textile newsletter. I read, there's an e-textile newsletter I read every week. The number of articles that are featuring like, I don't know how to say it, heads of manufacturers, old white men who are talking about how it's got to be environmentally friendly. That there are so many articles on like a new patent that's allowing us to take old textile waste and turn it into new textile waste, right? So that is absolutely the trend. It's not just coming from below. It's very much the people at the top see it as a must-have at this point for their products. And so by being able to provide those raw materials, we're able to provide a value add because it is more work.
Aaron, I don't want to interrupt, but it sounds like there's this connection almost, if you'll comment on this, where, the ecosystem is not necessarily, and maybe correct me if this is wrong, the ecosystem isn't concentrating on a business enterprise that is focused on lowest cost model, right? It's focused, it sounds like like all of these enterprises are built around a value add proposition that ensures that you're in a space where you're not in a competition around cost of product, right? There is some other kind of mechanism that you're saying, whether it's environmentally friendly or whether it's quality, there's some kind of ability to charge a premium that helps the business thrive as a business enterprise on its own. Is that fair? Or would you say that differently?
That's 100%. I mean, I think, so I used to have a spiel where, we're talking about reshoring jobs. We're talking about reshoring manufacturing. We can't compete on cost. I'm sorry, like we just can't do it, right? What we can compete on is just in time. We can compete on quality, right? Those things, quality, just in time service, those things require a more motivated workforce. They require more engaged workforce because they need to care. And I don't think employee ownership is the silver bullet to getting people to care, but I think it's kind of like it's adding something to the soil that really helps those qualities grow within a company, right? So yes, and I don't think you can do manufacturing in the US any other way. You've got to go on the quality side, the value add side, because we're not going to make widgets cheaper than other countries. I Before I go to kind of what you'll see, I do see this question about the US sustainability goals, and it's funny because we just revamped that metrics slide that I showed you, and so I just want to bring that up real quick. So that's a great question, just because you'll see we just revamped that metrics. I don't know if you all can see that well. I can zoom in. But our original metrics, when we were like, what do we measure? How do we measure our impact? We looked to the UN sustainability goals. And then we like at some point dropped talking about that. But like all of these, I forget how many, I apologize. I forget how many sustainability goals there are. But these were the goals that we pulled out from the very beginning. As to what goals that we're specifically working towards alleviating, and I hope you can see them in these stats, right? And if you can't, you'll be able to see them in our tours. But just keep that in mind, that yes, absolutely, that's been an inspiration to metrics from the beginning. And this is and these are the metrics that we feel like we are really addressing in our work today. So thank you for that question. So I do want to quickly what you're going to see. So you're going to see opportunity threads. The tour is going to be led by Molly Hemstreet, and you'll probably talk to Walter, who's the general manager. So Molly's going to lead the tour, and then we're going to have some time for you to talk to Walter about some of these co-op questions. And we'll get to, visit the beautiful 30,000 square foot facility and see what they're working on. Then we actually are going to do a quick stop at our innovation campus. Right now, it's not built. And so what happened, and this is another great kind of story of how we are trying to rebuild the communities after manufacturers leave. We bought for $3 million a brownfield that was a furniture manufacturer that burned down. It burned down in the 80s, I believe. They left and it was abandoned, and then the factory burned down, and no one's been able to do anything with it since. And so we were able to buy it. We've got some EPA grants to clean it up. We're just about done. It was really the brownfield was kind of like your best case scenario brownfield. I think it was like some giant oil drum that was buried, and so we dug that out so that it allowed for us to capture EPA grant money to fix it up, but it wasn't like, someone been dumping toxic waste there for like 20 years. So we're going to visit that space. We're going to hear from Aaron Kaiser, who's heading up that project. Not only are we building this beautiful facility, I think we're about to break ground by the end of this year. But we're also building housing co-ops over here. So we have a community land trust, and we're going to start building housing again around the same timeline. Aaron will be able to tell you more about that. So you'll be talking to Aaron, who heads up this project. You're going to learn about our second project by looking at the machine that does it. So again, we collect our partnership with Smart Wool. We collect socks from Smart Wool. We have it sent to South Carolina, where they ground it up and send it back to us like this. And we combine it with virgin wool from Smart Wool to turn it into this. This is called Sliver. Now, if you take that Sliver, I'm ruining the tour a little bit, but you'll learn about the process. But basically, this Sliver gets turned into yarn that gets turned into socks that gets sold in places like REI. So you're gonna meet Bunlick. He's gonna give you a tour and talk all about that. And you're going to visit our beautiful art space, which this, to me, kind of the crown jewel of the organization, of our tour, because it's, you go, you see our wonderful offices, and but they're just offices. You see this amazing manufacturing facility that's taking textile waste and turning it back into new materials. And in the corner of that warehouse is this little art space filled with art, filled with like colors and just all these projects that kids are working on throughout the year. And so it's really this like holistic view of making a better community. And it's yeah, it's a very touching, amazing thing that we've been able to kind of incorporate into our organization, again, through being a nonprofit. And so in the end, you're gonna get a deep dive with our programs, with Sarah Chester, our other co-founder. So you'll be able to talk to her about our programming. I'm still trying to figure out if it would be useful to bring in some of the other enterprise leads, like Work and Burke is that program that we talked about. We're trying to get youth involved in either local community colleges or local manufacturers. So we could bring in someone from that program to talk on this panel. You will be meeting folks from Good Books. You'll be getting a tour and talking to the folks from TOS. Yeah, so all of these little icons you're going to be able to get to learn more about. And then lastly, we're going to kind of hopefully end the day talking to me a little bit more about the work that I do. And we actually are hopefully about to make a hire of someone who's going to help basically take over the program of helping businesses become employee owned. And so what was I going to say? Hopefully she'll be there as well. So it'll be kind of end the day just talking about how employee ownership factors into everything we do, but also specifically how we help local workplaces become employee owned. So in 2023, we helped 2 different companies transition to employee ownership. And so we believe that we're not able to incubate and grow worker co-ops in our region all on our own. And we want to encourage other businesses to do the same. And so we have a direct focus on helping these businesses transition to employee ownership if that's what they want to do. And so we'll talk about those strategies, how we're doing it, how we're partnering with local organizations and state organizations to help make that happen. So I think that's it. Just some final logistic notes. If you are interested, and maybe Anna, you have more logistic notes. If you are interested, just note there is some walking, right? There's a fair amount of walking. So if walking is going to be hard, let me know and we can figure out, how to accommodate. We are going to be in manufacturing spaces, so closed-toed shoes. And my contact info is below. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to either text me or email me. I'm happy to answer any questions anytime. Again, my previous job was a customer service manager, so I try to respond within 24 hours most days. Yeah, so I think that's it from my side. I'm happy. Hannah, do you have any logistics notes?
Yeah, I'd love to just let people know, again, you can learn more about the learning tour to Morganton, North Carolina, to the Industrial Commons and all of the great work that's happening there on November 13th and 14th. So those are the dates. Part of that is travel. So the CFAES Center for Cooperatives, we are providing a coach bus for folks who are interested in attending this learning tour. That coach bus will travel from Piketon, Ohio. We'll head over to Athens, Charleston, West Virginia, and then head south to Morganton, North Carolina. You can see the schedule kind of outlined on the website that I put a link in the chat to. And then the schedule that Aaron just outlined with us to help us learn about how the Industrial Commons and all of these partners that they have worked with built a cooperative ecosystem, are building a cooperative ecosystem in a rural space in Appalachia, so that we can learn about that from our perspective in Appalachian, Ohio, and West Virginia. And we can take those learnings back with us in the work that we're all doing.